Welcome to our webinar on comprehensive literacy instruction, collaborative planning for students with significant support needs. It's so nice to have a group here today gathered. I'm Amy Connolly. I'm an occupational therapist and assistive technology specialist who contracts with the Special Education Technology Center. And I also work for the Bellingham Public Schools as the AT specialist. I'm joined here with Sarah. Sarah, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Sarah Ayers, and I am a speech language pathologist by training, AT specialist. I work for Special Ed Tech Center, of course, and I also am under contract with Bellevue School District, working as an AT specialist for them as well. We're so happy to have you all here. And we are curious who's all in this virtual space with us. So if you want to take a minute, you can put in the chat who's here. So maybe your name, your role, but also we want to know why you're here. What brings you to the space? What are you curious about? What do you want to learn more about? And that'll just give us an idea of maybe some things that we want to make sure we address in our conversation today.
Welcome, Stephanie. It's nice to see your interest in secondary setting. Sarah and I were just talking about that a moment ago, about the unique challenges of comprehensive literacy in secondary settings. Yay, we have some friends from SETBC in Canada. Welcome, Cheryl, motivated to help your students read and write. And welcome, Barb. Many of you may know Barb. She's our wonderful volunteer with SETC and has created so much of the content that we're going to be sharing today. She just keeps coming back for more, even though she's retired. So she's here to keep getting ideas and keep building out the resources. Thanks, Barb. Oh, wonderful. Margaret, we have a reading specialist. This is exciting. So we're always working on our links with colleagues, making our instruction more meaningful and comprehensive. So I'm so glad you're here. Thanks, everyone, for sharing these details. Kelsey, I'm curious how this is going to land for you today with what it looks like in your setting. And Linda, I know we're always trying to think about things at scale. We might be the only AT coordinator in the district, and how are we helping our staff pursue these ideas and instructional practices. I don't know if you all knew I'd be calling you out individually when you contributed to the chat, so I hope you're okay with that. Cool. We even have an instructional coach. Welcome, Matt. This is so diverse. It's exciting.
We're happy to have you all here. These are the learning objectives that we put into the webinar description. And really, this talk came out of a desire for us to create resources that are really tangible and practical for everybody, because we know that educators have the desire to implement evidence-based practices, but sometimes reading through the research and developing the really systematic practical tool is the heavy lift. So if we can give you something that, is this in between of reading the book, reading the research, and then actually implementing it, if we can facilitate that in some way, we would like to do that for you. We know that everyone is facing budgetary restrictions and barriers around time, obviously. And so we just really want to make this practical. We're also going to be hearing from Amy about a team that is doing this work in the district that she supports in Bellingham. And so she's going to be adding in some of these little nuggets of information where their team has been and where they're going as well. So hopefully you'll be able to hear about some of these concepts in action. So this is what we're going to cover overall. We are going to start with a very, very broad brush of what is comprehensive literacy for all. If you don't know much about it, we will give you a lot of resources for where you might learn more in the future. Coming up on a slide, we don't have enough time today to go over all of what is comprehensive literacy for all, but we'll set the foundation. We're going to touch very briefly on collaboration and the importance of that, especially in this work around comprehensive literacy. And then the meat of our presentation today is really these 4 tools that we have to offer you that you can use in planning and implementing this in your districts. And then as a bonus, beyond what we talked about in our initial objectives, we're also going to share some new learning that we had from a conference that we attended called Closing the Gap this fall around Project BC and some goal planning tools that they shared at that conference as well. So again, the challenge here as presenters is to meet the varied needs of all of you in the room. So we are going to make some broad assumptions. You came to this space, you've likely heard about what is comprehensive literacy for all, but we won't be teaching that specifically in detail. So again, please refer back to some past trainings and podcasts and sites that we'll provide for you. But really, the mindset here is the foundation. It's no student is too anything to be able to read and write. So no student is too disabled or too low, I put that in quotations, too old, to anything. All people can learn to read and write. And literacy skills are essential to autonomous communication. And what that means is that to be able to independently communicate, which is to be able to communicate anything to anyone at any time, you really do need to have access to literacy. You need to be able to spell and to write, because otherwise you cannot come up with that really spontaneous novel utterance generation. You're more reliant on what somebody else has programmed into your communication system. And so literacy skills are incredibly important. And of course, the book Comprehensive Literacy for All, I don't know if you can see, looks like this. And it was written by Drs. Erickson and Copenhaver in 2020. Really just rocked my world. And I'm sure if any of you have read the book, it probably shifted your practice quite substantially as well. So in Comprehensive Literacy for All, the authors break down this overarching goal of literacy into what they call emergent literacy and conventional literacy, with a bridge between that you could refer to as transitional. And emergent literacy really begins at birth, and it encompasses the reading and writing experiences of young children before they acquire those conventional reading and writing skills. And these behaviors, they could be anything from how you hold a book, how you orient it, turning the pages, scribbling. Those are all really critical precursors to developing what we consider conventional literacy. But the development of these early skills is really tied to opportunities that children are exposed to. And we know that children with significant disabilities often have more limited access to those experiences. So if they have a body that makes it more complicated to hold a pencil, for example, they might not have experiences and access to scribbling. So, what does it look like for these students in different bodies, or maybe students who are non-speaking and who may not be babbling with language in the same way? We need to still be able to offer these foundational opportunities and experiences in order for them to develop literacy skills. And this highlights the importance of ensuring that all students, regardless of ability, they can have equitable access to meaningful literacy experiences from the very earliest stages. And that will give them that strong foundation in reading and writing. So why do we teach emergent literacy? Too many times as educators, we see that our students with disability might be school age. And so educators make assumptions that these students should be ready for conventional literacy. So it might be that, my student is in first grade or second grade. And so we aren't going to allow them to scribble or to babble, that they just have to jump straight into these conventional literacy approaches. But what we needed to take into consideration is what I just talked about, that these students may not have had that opportunity to babble with language or to scribble with a pencil, to hold the book upside down, all of these emergent literacy experiences that really do prepare them for conventional literacy. And why is this essential? It serves as a foundation for conventional literacy. It provides the prerequisite skills that is necessary to continue to move on to more advanced literacy development. And it's also an essential life skill. For students with disabilities, it can open doors to not just communication, self-expression, but access to information, potential future jobs, and really meaningful participation in daily life and independence. And lastly, I just wanted to point out that this is really appropriate for all ages. So from students pre-K, that's what PK is, all the way to adults. So like we said before, there is no age cap on this. Just because a student or a person is a teenager, let's say, that doesn't mean that they cannot have exposure to emergent literacy. And this just underscores the importance that every student, regardless of their age or their ability, that they really need to have that opportunity to develop literacy skills in their own pace, but also ways that are meaningful to them. Did you want to add on anything to that, Amy?
No, I think you've said it beautifully. I think that
Okay,
really helps ground us today.
great. So when we're determining whether our student would be, what we might consider the emergent, in the emergent category versus conventional, the authors of the text take us through these 4 questions. So you can think to yourself, does your student know most of the letters most of the time? Does your student engage actively during shared reading? Do they have a means of communication and interaction? And do they understand that writing involves letters and words? And if your answer is no to any one of those questions, or if it's maybe, if you have to say, well, they kind of do, but maybe, then it's no. So then you're going to be really working on those emergent interventions. And those include shared reading, predictable chart writing, alphabet and phonological awareness, independent writing with access to the full alphabet, self-directed reading, and symbol-based communication. If the answer is yes, then you would be working on more conventional literacy skills like reading comprehension, word study, writing, self-directed reading, and communication, of course. And then there's a hyperlink here that it can take you to a blog post that's on the publisher's website where they really take you through these 4 questions, as well as some other considerations and questions when determining what would be an appropriate intervention for your student.
I just want to interject to say that once again, we don't know where everyone is coming from regarding your background knowledge of the book. So if you have questions about these interventions, we're happy to field those in the chat. We may not, have a whole session on predictable chart writing, but we're happy to just have a quick dialogue about what each one means in this context. So feel free to let us know if you've got questions.
Absolutely. Until if and when those come through, I'm going to kind of keep us moving forward, but happy to stop and pause at any point here. And as promised, here is a list of all different types of resources that you can access for more information about comprehensive literacy for all in general. So we have linked here some online modules from AltShift. If you like to learn from modules, literacy instruction for students with significant disabilities. This takes you directly to the Literacy for All instruction website. So that is the website based out of the University of North Carolina, where a lot of this research is done. We also have several different podcast episodes or even complete seasons listed here. I want to highlight the one Awe and Wonder podcast, which is put on by 2 of our amazing Special Ed Tech Center colleagues, Sarah and Brenda. And they did an entire season 3, on comprehensive literacy for all. So if you're a listener, that would be a good one to listen to. And then this is an article by Erin Sheldon on emergent literacy instruction for students with significant disabilities in the regular classroom. So lots of resources to build that background knowledge if you would like to do so.
Let me interject again here.
Absolutely.
The AltShift modules, they are comprehensive modules, but they also contain a playlist on YouTube. I think the total watch time would be only 14 or 15 minutes, and they're just 1 to 2 minute clips of the authors, Dr. Erickson and Dr. Copenhaver, speaking to very introductory ideas, like what is it that we're talking about? What can we expect to see from students and mindset? And so I really love those videos. If you click down a few links, I'm not quite sure the pathway to the YouTube playlist, but I like those because I've used them to share with colleagues to communicate the concepts really succinctly.
Yeah, thank you for highlighting that. I've done the same. I actually got the idea from you, Amy. But some of the videos are only 1 or 2 minutes. So for those of you who are in the space who are leading professional development, maybe, or who are coordinators, and you are wanting to teach others on your team, I would recommend those as well, especially because they come from the voice of the authors themselves. And everyone wants something really short and bite-sized these days. So that those are great resources. Okay, before we get into the planning sheets, we just wanted to pause and take a minute to talk about the importance of collaboration. And, while we could do all of this work in isolation, and I'm sure many of us do, collaborating is really key to supporting these individuals. It's just really helpful to capture the insights of the multidisciplinary team perspective. My what I may have to contribute as an SLP would be different than what Amy would have as an occupational therapist from her lens. And that would also be different from what a teacher would have from their lens. And so really being able to collaborate as a whole team is in the best interest of your student if you are able to do so. And we really did develop these planning sheets that we're going to share with that collaboration in mind. And we think that this is just a really powerful way of syncing your understanding as well as gaining the perspective of the full team. And so I put a quote on here from TIES Center, and this is also linking here to their website. It says, collaboration is key to quality inclusive education for students with disabilities, including students with significant cognitive disabilities. And on the TIES Center website, I did also want to point out that they have a page that's called, I believe it's the 153045. And so it is a tool. It looks like Amy wants to share something. Or
It's
is it
actually 5:15:45. Like they
Yep,
they
you're
emphasize
right.
how briefly it can be. But go ahead.
You're
Sorry.
right. Yes, yes. And so what that is it's it's a different form. So if you want yet another tool for collaboration, but it's a different version of the form depending on how much time you have. So if you only have 5 minutes and your student is going to be included in the general education setting, and you want to meet with your gen ed partner or your special ed partner and really identify what is the learning target for today's lesson, and you only have 5 minutes, you can grab that tool from their website and use that to facilitate your conversation, your dialogue together. So I did want to mention that. And collaboration can really be facilitated by taking the initiative, being the person to say, let's meet. I have 5 minutes. I'm coming to your office, and getting it done. Really clearly defining your roles. Who's going to be doing this during this instruction? Who's going to be doing this maybe during a different opportunity? Communicating openly and respectfully with each other, establishing the culture so that you all have shared beliefs and shared mindset around what does inclusion mean, and what are our students going to be doing, and then really just being flexible and open-minded. Did you want to add on to that, Amy?
I just want to appreciate that you brought that resource back to my mind, because I have a meeting coming up next week with a team that I have not yet worked with, and we're trying to figure out what meaningful inclusion is going to look like in a gen ed setting with a student who has complex AT going on, AAC user, and I'm excited to go back and actually try to use the TIES tool. So thanks.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, so I think many people here are here to see these tools that we keep alluding to. So when you're planning for your instruction, we have gathered these resources and created some ourselves. The first being a unit planning guide, the second being an individual student modifications planning tool. The third is a full resource of comprehensive literacy concepts. And then finally, our comprehensive literacy for all book collection that Barb has so graciously put together. So we'll take you through each of these. The first one that we wanted to share is a unit planning document. So this would be a document that you would hopefully do in collaboration with your colleagues that identifies, when I'm looking at this entire unit, what is our grade level connection goal, overarching goal going to be? And then what are these different components that we would use to instruct perhaps our group that we're instructing. So this is looking at the unit overall as a whole. And so this is based on the work, her name got cut off here, but it's based on the work of Jane Farrell. And we have linked in here the document itself, as well as a video that you can see of Amy, myself, and Barb using this planning document. So it's a bit small, so I'll read what we have here and then I'll show you the document itself. So this is where you would write what week you're doing it, what that explicit grade level connection is. And this part is important because this is that tie-in to potentially gen ed curriculum. And then if you have a book of the week that you're reading, perhaps for guided reading, that could be listed here, and then shared reading book of the week as well. Andrea, I see in the chat, hello, Andrea, that you want to know more about the book collection. And yes, absolutely. We're going to be talking all about that in just a few minutes as well. In this first upper quadrant here, this is where you could write out different purposes for guided reading. And it also hyperlinks to that third document that we're going to talk about too, which is the full list of all of the different concepts that are talked about in the Comprehensive Literacy for All book. Here is where you could write self-directed reading resources for the unit, and that can remain the same week after week, depending on what you're doing. And then here is where we would write about alphabet knowledge and phonemic awareness or word study activities, depending on if your students are more of that emerging level or conventional level or mixed. And then different purposes for writing, as well as a predictable chart writing frame, what sentence structure frame you might want to use for predictable chart writing. Before I pull this up, Amy, did you want to add anything onto that?
I guess I want to give a framing just to avoid anyone feeling discouraged, because we developed these two planning sheets about a year ago in preparation for the literacy retreats that we were hosting at SETC. And we've definitely, brought a lot of thought to this process. And what we learned since then is that it might not be what you need. It might be too specific, or it might not cover the right time frame, and that's okay. So we saw there was value here, and then some people adapted them, as you'll hear, and they make it their own. And then we've even more recently discovered some highly simplified planning templates. So we're kind of starting in the deep end, I feel like, where if you really are comfortable with the concepts and you're already planning a routine, this kind of form might match your needs. And if it feels overwhelming, hang in there. We're going to get to a more simplified template.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that. So to show you what it looks like, and again, these are all linked. So you have access to these as well. This is the blank form. Make it a little bit bigger for you, maybe. So these are all the components of it. And then this hyperlinks directly to that concepts page. Ooh, trying to go the other way. There we go. And then just to show you what the video is, it's a video that Amy and I made alongside Barb, where we were acting out the roles of SLP, OT, and teacher, using this form to guide a collaborative conversation around a unit that we were planning. So this YouTube video, if you have time or just kind of want to quickly scroll through it, can show you how you might use the form in a group together.
Yeah, thanks. I want to return to the, you were referencing when the reading purposes is hyperlinked to the list of strategies. We think of that document, which is again our third resource, as like a quick guide. So it's, okay, what was that intervention? What are some examples of it? So we'll view it in a moment, but I'm paraphrasing that as a quick guide. Here we go, the concepts.
We could just go there now, Amy. Do you want to talk about this one since you started?
Sure. Yeah, sorry I'm getting you out of order, but this is that resource, which is kind of like glossary in a way. Or so if you're using the forms and you're like, what do they mean by an anchor for the reading experience? Or what are I'll let it load here. What are some examples of how we would apply? And then these are very specific examples of what the student might do or what your activity is. So and Barb really authored this, and I think took a lot of examples directly from the comprehensive literacy book.
Yep.
But the idea was the explanations were embedded in the planning forms so that you didn't have to go read the book again just to follow the template.
Exactly. So basically, Barb went through the entire comprehensive literacy for all book, took out those concepts and put them all in this glossary of sorts so that instead of going like, where's my book and going back through it, what did they say you could do for a student who's at the emerging level? You can look here and everything is bookmarked and linked to that planning sheet as well.
Yeah. Thanks for letting me hop out of order there. We can
Yeah,
go back to
absolutely.
the planning sheet.
So going back to the unit planning, here is just a quick example of a completed one. So if our grade level connection is forces of motion, the guided reading book might be Newton and Me, and the shared reading book could be Don't Push the Button. And then we just really listed out some guided reading purposes, beginning with shared reading, but adding in the car and crowd strategy, listening for action words, rhyming words, and so on. And again, these come from that glossary that we were just alluding to of guided reading purposes. And then some self-directed reading resources for the week. This would just be what we would make sure that our classroom library contains for that unit. While we're talking about forces of motion, we could have previous predictable chart writing books. We could have access to what's now called Monarch Reader. We could have checklists for the staff to use to ask the students questions. And then alphabet knowledge and writing purposes as well. So difference between guided reading and shared reading, or how to choose a book for each. Yes. So the very high level difference between them, shared reading is something that you can do for both emerging and conventional literacy learners. And the intention and focus behind shared reading is really on connection and collaboration. So it's really let's communicate, let's talk about this, let's make connections to your life, let's engage with the text. Whereas guided reading is when you start to read for more of those purposes, like the car and the crowd. So I might be commenting, asking a question, looking for a response, and using some more of those strategies that are talked about in the book to facilitate the reading experience. Amy, did you want to add on to that at all? Or maybe Barb? Barb is our resident expert in all of this too.
I'll just add on to what you've said already, Sarah. And a big difference between guided reading and shared reading is shared readings. The basic reason for it is to empower the student to communicate during the reading and to impact the interaction, to create interactions, and to make it a really meaningful activity for them. And so the focus is really on communication. Whereas, and following the car and crowd strategies helps support their participation and interaction in that reading. And the guided reading, again, is more focused on what is our purpose for reading the book today, and what can the students do to participate in that purpose.
Thank you. That's really helpful. And then for the second part of your question to Stephanie, where you asked how do you choose a book, I think it would just depend on who are the students in front of you and what is the purpose of the activity. So for a shared reading, I would be looking for a text that I think my students might really connect with and be able to communicate about. Whereas for a more like a guided reading book, I might be looking for something that is targeted to whatever my reading purpose is for that day. So if I'm listening for action words, I might be looking for a book that has a lot of action words built into it.
I was reading Alyssa's comment in the chat, responding to this example, which is about a science topic. It sounds like you're asking, how do you choose where to focus without ignoring, do you mean other interventions like shared guide, like reading, writing, or
No, like
research?
other curricular topics. Like if science is the focus of the week, is that are they not getting then access to the gen ed's literacy
Yeah.
topic of the week or
I,
social studies topic of the week? Like, are we the ones that are kind of pinpointing what they get access to? And because we're kind of going more in depth versus breadth, I don't know. Do you run into that?
Absolutely. We all are human and have limits in our day, and we don't have that much time with students, to be honest. And we know that time gets taken up by a lot of things. So I think we probably all can relate to that pressure. I'm reminded of, well, we observed some sentiments from our study, and it was doing it imperfectly is better than not doing it at all. And in this example, we're looking at a science topic, but we're embedding that literacy. So, drawing connections and kind of layering, I think, as much as possible. That's where that collaboration is key, so that things are multidimensional. What do other people have some thoughts about how you pick priorities? To me, it comes down to the IEP team and how you're really considering that individual student and what your priorities are. But I'd be happy to hear from other people.
I'm a theme-based person. And so if I was to take a look at what was happening in the second grade classroom in science that week, I'd probably try to find some books that supported that were more picture book oriented, maybe, especially for older students. If you're working on physics and in a science class, finding some picture books that represent the concepts being discussed in physics in terms of motion, and finding ones that are relevant for the age and age respectful, but still help our design such that students can interact more easily about those things while they're still listening to the vocabulary that they need to learn. Same with math, same with social studies. If you're doing research on mummies, and again, finding books that tie into that. And that's where I can put in my plug. If anybody has those things come up and you'd like ideas for books, or maybe have a book and would like some lesson activity ideas for that book, please let me know.
Thank you, Barb. I also, so the power of themes and then working flexibly within those themes. But I'm also thinking about, this is like the idea behind UDL with the firm goal. Hopefully you've had that process of defining what is the key outcome that you're looking for. Can be really powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. The only thing I would add to all of that is engagement too. What's something that you think will be engaging for your students? Because if you don't have that, then they're not going to want to sit there and listen to it.
It's so true. The best laid plans. You're like, we could do it all these different ways. And then the student's noping out.
Yep.
But what do they say? It's our job to make them want to do it, not to make them do it.
Yep, exactly. These are great questions coming through, so please keep them coming. The second planning form that we wanted to show you is an individual student modification form. So where the previous one looked at the whole unit overall, this one is where you can really look at each day of the week independently and what are each of the students that you are teaching working on. So, day one, what is the reading purpose? What is the writing? What is alphabet knowledge and phonemic awareness or word study topic? And then first students A, B, and C, what is their purpose? What is their writing task? Where are they at? And really writing on here accommodations that they might have, or tools that you might need to have access to. And here is an example of a completed one that we did sorry, part of it is covered by my controls. I'm trying to move for the books, Newton and Me and Don't Push the Button. So going back to forces of motion, with day one, the reading purpose being shared reading, car and crowd. So this came from our unit planning example that we talked about with our fictitious student, Calvin, really focusing on car, commenting and responding, using less directives, attributing meaning to what he is expressing or doing, relating his action to the book. Whereas for the student Maddie, working more on crowd, so answering those open-ended questions using her AAC system, distancing, so thinking deeply about what we're reading and making those personal connections to it, incorporating core board and referring to the book for the fringe instead of, so in addition to the core board, using the book itself as the fringe vocabulary. And then for the student Luella, same as Maddie, but her response would be via PAS's partner assisted scanning and a core board using descriptive teaching. So really getting down to the nitty gritty for each of these students who are on your caseload or in this lesson. How are they accessing each of these tasks and what materials and accommodations do you need?
I'll add, and by way of adding, kind of introduce the anecdote we'll share. This example, this exercise we did was based on an actual group that was occurring at one of the elementary schools that I support. They had gathered their students who had more complex needs, and they were in a separate setting. They aligned their schedule that across the school so that everyone had a literacy block at that time. So while the whole school had grand ambitions of increasing inclusive practices, their way of getting at the unique opportunities that these students needed at the time was to do it in a dedicated space with all the resources and with a whole team. I think it involved every related service provider on different days of the week. So that is some context for how you might accomplish all these different things for the same book, but it could look different. This plan could play out really differently if your circumstances are different. So I just wanted to give that caveat because another question here, Andrea asked, how many minutes per day do your students typically receive for literacy? I'm going to put that out to the group. I don't think I could even comment on it because of my role. I'm pretty peripheral on each team as the AT specialist for the whole school district. So could anyone chime in with some examples of how much time?
I'll chime in and just say that if you have the book Comprehensive Literacy for All on page 205, the authors have a whole chart with each of these components and whether you would engage in that activity with an emergent student, a conventional student, or combined group. And then they have listed times in this table, suggested amounts of minutes for each of these tasks. And I will say I presented on this to my school district, to some folks who came, and they just said no. We don't have that much time.
Yeah. Wasn't it like 2 hours or like
in a lot of
cases?
It's a very significant amount of time. Like even the total for combined, so the total for emergent is 90 to 135 minutes. The total for conventional is 120. And the total for a combined group is 130 plus 10 to 15 minutes once a week for predictable chart writing. So it's a significant amount of time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we know that's not necessarily what happens, so it just speaks to the value in working with your team to embed it throughout the day in all kinds of different ways.
Absolutely.
Going down the hallway and observing the letters that you're seeing.
Yep. And something's better than nothing, and doing it imperfectly is better than not doing it at all. So just keep telling yourself that as you go.
Mm-hmm.
Did you want to share about this, Amy?
Sure. Yeah. So I was just speaking to this specific team at an elementary school, and I'd say their journey really kicked off a few years ago when many staff took the Project Core modules and they started learning about the power of core vocabulary. They became really adept at modeling all the time and using language in really flexible ways. So they were they were already kind of growing as a team, and then they got the literacy book and were jazzed about it. But what really, this story kind of could truly begin last fall when they joined the SETC Literacy Retreat as a teacher, an OT, an SLP, another teacher at the school, and a parent. I don't think the parent educator came to that session. But what the team did is they took these templates and created a plan with, well, specifically that student by student plan. And so a paraeducator who hadn't been at the training would receive a written plan, and she knew what student she was working with and exactly how she could help them participate. And she loved it. She just raved about how that empowered her to make good choices and to be supportive and to just know what's going on, how much more comfortable and successful she was. So that's one point along their journey where they started using the plans. I'm just going to say what I was going to say later in the presentation, which is that they came up with a motto. Many of us at that retreat had a motto of repetition with variety, I think. So they created a template that each week allowed them to modify the book and, what the sentence stem was for the predictable chart writing. And just by having that plan, it took so much pressure off of them to be able to come in on Monday and improvise in meaningful ways. So wanted to share their experience with the planning process. That was over the course of a year last year. They became a strong team, and then they had changes. Certain students with specific needs left that school. New staff came on board. They had a new SLP, and I had the pleasure of visiting them in December. So this is halfway through their second year of planning literacy activities in this way. And they were rocking it. They had, all different players, but they were just able to fluidly use the tools and know the focus. And I really liked seeing their journey because it pointed to the power of that repetition with some variety to keep it interesting, of course, and how that freed them to be collaborative and creative. And students were really engaged and showing skills that were far beyond what we had seen in the years prior.
That's an incredible story. I love that, Amy. Thanks for sharing. I also appreciate that phrase, repetition with variety, because it makes it seem doable. You don't have to spend all of this time every time planning. You can take the skeleton that you've already developed and just tweak certain things. So planning can go much more quickly next time.
Oh, I want to say one more thing. I have this tendency when I talk about that team that I make them sound like they do everything perfectly. They don't. They would happily say it is a mess sometimes. So please don't hold yourself to that standard if you feel like it's too intimidating, because they're a really good example of just very real progress in the midst of a lot of chaos, to be honest.
Good chaos. All right, I'm going to skip through the last planning sheet since we already showed it and move on to the Comprehensive Literacy for All book collection. So this is a collection that was created by the wonderful Barb Lark, who you heard from a minute ago. And it really is a collection of books that she has created individual planning sheets for. And each sheet is what you could consider a quick reference sheet that has lists of example strategies that are all distilled straight from Comprehensive Literacy for All text. And so it lists suggested strategies that you could use, as well as having accompanying materials, such as some fringe vocabulary boards that you could use together with the student's AAC device. And some of them even have clicker sets too, which we'll show you, as well as optional extension activities. Amy, did you want to talk at all more about this? Oh, you're muted.
Sorry, I was responding to the chat while you introduced it. So yes, we are here at the book collection, and some of you had specific questions about it. And luckily we're joined by Barb, the creator. So here's an example. When you're on the SETC website searching for a book, do we have a visual of what that search looks like? Maybe.
Yes, it's
yeah, this is well, this is one entry point. Another one would be the title search that you see as a one. Either way, you can dial down into a book, and that would bring you to what we were just viewing, the cover, and a little bit about it, some tags that are there, and each one has the planning link. So if you click on that planning link, you will find the document that is also a template that contains all kinds of implementation ideas for each book. So if you're not feeling creative, this is a gold mine. Even if you are feeling creative, it's a starting point for where you might go. Barb, do you want to chime in on your planning sheet? Keep putting you on the
Nope,
spot.
you're covering it very well. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so as you can see in the planning sheets, there are some guided reading ideas. You could have as many as one per day for a whole week. Some of them have shared writing ideas, a lot of like sentence stem for predictable chart writing. There's even some additional expansion activities that will allow for more tactile experiences or just different media options. And again, Barb's provided that cheat sheet in case you wanted to check your understanding of a concept. Additionally, from the planning sheet, you might find a vocabulary page, which has some symbols and vocabulary related to the book. Those are intended to be prompts for you to think about, where is this vocabulary in the student system? We don't really, from what we've learned more recently, we don't necessarily want to rely on vocabulary that just appears and then disappears as a part of an AAC system, or like visual symbols, but they're valuable, right? When a student can point to a fringe board and express knowledge of the book or participate in the reading, there's a lot of different ways you can use them. I feel I might have represented that well. Sarah, do you want to restate what I've just shared?
No, I think that's great. So each book that you look for has all of this information related to it. And the book collection itself has what, over 200 books, Barb? Is that
More?
more?
Yeah.
Over
Barb's a machine.
over 260 right now.
Over 260, and always accepting new ideas for additional books. So I'm sure you're all wondering, how do I get there? So I'm going to take you on a really quick tour of how to get there. You come to Special Ed Tech Center website, which I'm putting in the chat right now. And you can bookmark that site. It's a good one. If you scroll down, you'll see there's a tile here that says Comprehensive Literacy for All Book Collection. You click on that, and that takes you up to this new search page that we have. And then there is a tutorial here if you need that to refer to remind you what's in this collection. And then here's where you can suggest books to add to the collection. And then you can search in one of four ways. You can search here for any sort of category that you're looking for. You can search by level here. You can search by title here. And you can also search by strategy here. So if you're looking to target phonemic awareness, I would click here. And then the books that really lend themselves nicely to phonemic awareness come here. And then you find the book that you're interested in, you click on it. If there is an option here that says barcode, that's because it's available in the Special Ed Tech Center's lending library for you to check out, and you can add it to cart to check out. But this activity planning, the physical book, yes, yeah. Thank you. Mm-hmm. And then the planning link is the link that you would click on to take you to all the good stuff that we showed you before.
Sarah, will you go back to the SETC website?
Absolutely.
Search page, this page right here, and scroll down a little bit. If you're someone who is also using Clicker, we have an incredible collection of Clicker sets that are actually already done for many of these books, and they've been published by SET BC, our friends in British Columbia. And so you can go hop over via that link and discover the sets that are available to use. So really helpful if you're using Clicker.
Barb, is there anything else you want to add about this?
Nope.
Nope. Nope. All right.
I guess I would just add, so Sarah does the newsletter for SETC every month, and she does a book nook, book corner, with the book, highlighting one or two books from the book collection in her newsletter. And so she sends me a way ahead of time requests for books for that next upcoming month. Anyway, and I just thought, oh, I'll try to use this the keyword search for the word love, and because it's Valentine's month, and anyway, so that brought up the book Love Z, which is a multi-age book, and just a lovely book about love. So that's kind of the power of using this for theme focused kinds of planning.
Mhm.
So again, these slides that you have access to just remind you of how to find all this information and how to access it. So feel free to refer back to those. And I believe you already talked about this, right, Amy?
Yeah.
Okay. So that brings us to Project BC. Do you want to share a little bit about this?
Sure. Before we move on to Project BC, I just want to reflect back that some folks in the chat said they're very familiar with the book collection and they love it and they've used it to make their own planning templates. So if anyone wants to share what they've created, we would love to see how that's landing for you. So please think about sending that over via this chat or just via email. You'll have our emails at the end. Okay, so Project VC. Now, VC stands for Virtual Coaching, and this project comes from UNC, where the Center for Literacy Disability Studies is located. And so Karen Erickson is a part of the project, and it is designed to support teams in efforts to provide comprehensive literacy instruction through professional development, formative assessment, implementation supports that help track and improve outcomes for all students. So that's a lot. I shouldn't have led with the acronym because that does emphasize the coaching part, but we are sharing this today because Project VC contains really essentially a progress monitoring tool for teams that are planning instruction. And it prompts teams to look for specific evidence. And we'll get into some planning sheets. But before that, Sarah, would you like to speak more to the, well, it's a lot. I might not use all the terms correctly, but there are different scales and indicators. So it just really encourages reflection and dialing into your goals, dialing down into what are you really wanting to see your student accomplish, and linking it to standards like we were talking about earlier. So we think there's a lot of value in this tool. It's pretty new to us. We just learned about it in October at Closing the Gap. But I encourage you to have a look if you are trying to get more specific with your instructional goals. And I see, yeah, virtual coaching. So let's look at the website. So the Professional Learning for Coaches is a suite of modules that are multimedia. You can listen to them, you can watch the videos, you can read things, and it's targeting our staff who are supporting many other staff. Or maybe you're like coaching your colleague. You know, we know coaching can happen a lot of ways, but this is designed to help us think about our own professional skill set. And maybe I know a lot about AT, but I need to get better at adult learning, and how am I introducing concepts to people in a training, or standards. I actually thought that module on standards was really helpful for me. So this is one element of Project BC. It's the, if you go back up, the Professional Learning for Coaches. Now, scanning over on the navigation bar there, progress monitoring tool, that's what we think super helpful to everyone, you know, in every educator on the team, where you are encouraged to use this tool to Find the point in each scale where, like, consider a specific student or group of students, and then look at the scales to help identify what are you trying to do with your instruction and what do you expect to see as a result. So we think that specificity can be really helpful when we're working across disciplines.
Yeah, I
Sarah,
don't
you've been
need
working more
to
closely.
go.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, I don't know that we need to go into a lot of detail about it on at this training, but just to show you quickly what it is. If we're looking at expressive communication here, they really break down into these levels from level emergent 1, E1, transitional 3, conventional 5 to 7. So again, thinking back to that diagram we showed in the beginning of emergent and conventional literacy, it really ties back to that and what would be the description of a student at each of those levels. And then when you scroll down, this shows you how to determine what level they're at. So it really is this, answer this question. If yes, then go to the next. If not, then go to the next. And then you can list all your students. It's just very, very detailed. And then with this down here being the scale itself. So if you have a student who, let's say, is at emergent level 2, this would be an overall outcome. When interacting with peers or adults in academic contexts, the learner uses concrete and abstract words, signs, or symbols to initiate and respond. And then they break it down into these objectives as well as evidence. So what would that look like? The data being a photo of something or a note that someone shared or a video clip that you have. So it really helps think about all the nuances of working with students at this level, and how you could consider writing a goal that is very targeted towards where they actually are and where you think they might get to in, for example, a year on an IEP, and then how you might collect the data or the evidence for that.
Thanks, Sarah. I just noticed the time. I want to get to the planning sheets before we wrap up, but that does, I think, better explain the value of the tool. So bookmark it, have a look. Along with the rollout of Project VC, they shared these planning sheets. And I think this is really empowering because it's so straightforward. There's one it's the comprehensive program plan. There's one for emergent and one for conventional. And the table includes the first column. These are the interventions that we saw in the flow chart. So they don't have too much complexity baked in. It's just, what intervention are you trying to do, with whom, where, when, and then what are those important strategies that you're going to use and the tools and materials. So that could be the book that you picked. And so I think these are a good place to start. That's where I would start.
We were having a discussion right before this. Are we giving you too many choices and all these different types of planning sheets? Because we really want this to be practical and usable, tomorrow walking into your class. Really, we just decided in the end, we're going to give them to you, and then you can determine this suits my style, this suits my team style. And really, I want to focus on my individual student, or I want to look at this program plan overall as a whole first, and then dive into that. So we just wanted to give you access to all of these so that you can decide what works best for you and your team.
Yeah.
So in summary, collaboration is key for successful comprehensive literacy instruction, as well as just it's best practice for all students, especially those with complex needs. And planning templates and pre-made resources like some that we've shared with you today can really assist with the process. Instead of walking in there with nothing, you can walk in there with something just to start the conversation, and then also hopefully have to be able to share with team members who weren't there during the planning process. And then finally, your little bonus that you got today was about Project VC, which is this new evidence-based tool that can be really useful to providing both literacy instruction as well as just goal writing, data collection. I mean, all the pieces that are encompassed in this comprehensive literacy instruction. So with that, we are out of time, but happy to take any questions that you might have. And we also have our email addresses linked on here as well, in case you wanted to follow up that way.
Yes, thank you, everyone. We really appreciate the engagement and wish you luck in your collaborative planning. There's a great question in the chat about what else is coming up. This is a perfect prompt. We do have a literacy retreat coming up in March. It's actually one of the events will be virtual on March 15th. And then there is a in-person option if you're anywhere near Bellingham. We're going to do that on March 29th. And our purpose in getting together on those days is to be able to dig into these resources and plan ideally with our teams. So I checked the SETC website for all the details, and I'm sure there's tons of other great stuff on the SETC website regarding literacy. There's always something happening. I just wanted to plug the literacy retreats that are coming up this winter, spring.
Absolutely. Thank you all. If you have questions, we're happy to stay on for a few minutes and answer those as well.